Hello, I'm Javis Lewis, and in this episode I want to show you a technique to create artificial depth of field into your images and into especially your renders, and that's done with a Photoshop filter called the blur gallery. Now this was something very exciting that one of my Patreon supporters made me aware of, Christina McKay. Hello Christina. That was a very nice tip, and I thought I liked it so much I wanted to make a video about it. I haven't quite grasped it yet, but it gives you a lot of potential for exploration, and I want to show you some examples of how to work with them. So yesterday I did a live stream about this image here, in which we're building this whole scene in DAZ Studio. So watch it if you're interested in building that. This is kind of a hotel, indoor hotel pool scene. We're adding these lights underwater here. We're putting the character in, and we're putting the lights on the walls here. But one of the things that I didn't do in that image, and it's kind of, I hope you can just about see that here in the image, there's some depth of field trick going on here in the bottom and at the back, and that is something that I've not done in DAZ Studio. Quite the opposite, I've done it in Photoshop with this type of filter, and it's very subtle, so you can easily overdo it and then it looks very artificial. But if you're careful with it, then this creates kind of very stunning effects, and it cuts down tremendously on render time. So let's have a look how to do that in Photoshop. I have a few images open here already. This is one with that effect applied already. Again, very, very subtle. You can just about see at the bottom here that these guys, whoops, that's obviously not what I wanted to do. You can just about see at the bottom here that this is kind of out of focus. And you can also see that on the background here at the top, you can see that as well. But other than that, it's a very subtle effect, and it's done with the blur gallery. If I switch that off, then everything is in absolute focus, and if I switch that back on, then it's probably difficult to see. I'll have to kind of overdo it. Here's a few other things. This is an image that I haven't done it on, so I thought maybe we can create it on here. And here's that pool scene, so we're going to recreate that effect in here. And to show you a non-render image, I'm going to do that on a regular picture like this as well, which is a picture of me, as you can see. And I like to style my thumbnails this way as well, so that the focus is literally just on the face and the rest kind of blurs into the background. Let's start with the rat lady here. So let me just get rid of that effect. And these two things at the top here, those are literally just filters for enhancing the contrast and the color. So this is not something that we don't have to concern about that. It's just it just enhances the look of the image. The actual effect is happening on this layer on the bottom here. So in order to apply that effect, one thing that I would recommend is to turn this layer that you're working on, first of all, into a regular layer. So if you have a layer that says background on it, then you just have to double click that, and then that background will turn it to something like layer 0 or layer 1 if you're loading a JPEG image into Photoshop. So turn that into a regular layer, then turn it into a smart object. So I've done that already because I can see this little icon here, but if you want to do that, you just right click on this, and then somewhere in the list there is this option to convert this into a smart object. Of course can't find that right now because I've done that already. So we're going to hopefully do that in another layer that hasn't got that effect applied. So once you've done that, select the layer, then head over here to filter, and then there's the blur gallery. And in the blur gallery you find several options here. The ones I find particularly interesting in fact are the iris blur, which is kind of a round cutout, and the tilt shift blur. That's the one we're going to use. No matter which one of these things you choose, you're always going to end up in this kind of menu here. So this is this always looks the same, and you've got each of these filters is tickable at the top here, so they can be stacked and used together with one another. So the one that you select, that's kind of pre-ticked, and it's got a couple of values here. So mine has got a blur of 15 pixels applied already, and this is kind of what it looks like. So there's a few things that we can change here just with the mouse. So speaking of mice, very funny. So one is of course this little round icon in the middle. So if you hover your cursor right into the dead center, then you can move the focal point, so to say. Focal point is probably the wrong word for it, but you can move that up or down or left or right, wherever you would like the center of your focus to be. So in my case, perhaps I want to put that somewhere on the character. I don't have to put it on the character in this case. I can put it further off because this tilt shift filter works kind of in the whole line here. So this whole band will be in focus, whereas anything from here to that dotted line, let me bring that down so that dotted line appears to the top and to the bottom of whatever's in focus. That's kind of the gradient that's being applied from it being in focus here and it being out of focus here. And then everything outside the dotted lines here and there, that's where the full effect of the blur comes in. So this is kind of my 15 pixel blur here now. So I put that maybe somewhere towards her eyes here, and the dotted lines can also be expanded independently of one another. So I can move the bottom one further down and the top one is left in place, or I can move that up and up as well. I can also do that with these solid lines here. I can kind of just make sure you're not getting this symbol here. So if you get this little up and down arrow, you can expand the area that's meant to be in focus. And then you can shift that around here. So perhaps I don't want to see the mice, or I don't want to see the skirt because it's not rendered quite perfectly. It's one of those things. You can do that, and then of course adjust the blur accordingly. So make that more blurry or make that less blurry. It depends on what your image needs here. So I don't want to have these mice to be completely out of focus, but just to overdo it, just to emphasize the effect here, maybe I will just do that. So that's one thing you can do. You don't have to go over here to adjust the value. You can also hover outside this little center circle and then just go and increase the blur effect from here. Can you see that? That's kind of an interesting way of doing that. So depending on how much or how little you need in there, you can do that on the fly while looking at the picture. It's kind of a nice effect there. So that's one effect. There's also other things here under the effects panel. There's bokeh and the bokeh color. So light bokeh, if I crank that up, then you can see what happens to the kind of light passages here. They kind of bloom out. So that's the kind of light bokeh effect. Kind of can be kind of pretty, because this is going to be out of focus anyway. So the extremes are going to create very nice effects there. They're just not going to look real. If you're introducing depth of field, you want that to look kind of subtly real, and just add that subtly. So use that sparingly. But it's one of those things. If you're After Effects, very funny. You can play around with that. Bokeh color, same thing. If you crank that up, then the white bit that's kind of bloomed out white, that's now being kind of colored in here. Again, one of those things. Explore it on your own. I'm not going to use it for now. It does actually look quite nice, isn't it, if the blur is extreme. Once you're done with it, you can either select the high quality thing up here. If you want to use high quality, that only affects the action after OK. It'll take a little bit longer if you have a faster computer. It's barely noticeable. I don't see a big difference here, so I'm going to leave that unticked. I'm okay with regular quality. Now I mentioned smart filters here because if I now see I'm not entirely happy with the result, and I'm thinking, hey, perhaps I've overdone it here with the mice. I can't actually see that these guys are mice anymore. Perhaps I'm going to bring the whole focus line down a little bit. Then I can do that by simply double clicking here on the blur gallery. So there we go. If I double click this thing, then I'm going to go straight back into the filter. And that's the beauty of smart objects. So if I now adjust this, I can. So it's kind of a non-destructive editing. Perhaps this effect was a bit too much, so I can turn that down. And whatever I want to do there. You can also slant this, so it doesn't have to be absolutely straight. I've mentioned this little dot here. If you move that over, you can do this. So we're going to use that technique in the pool scene in a moment. And then you just click either cancel if you're not happy with your changes, or you click OK to burn them in. I'm just going to go and hit cancel. That's the importance of the smart filters. And yeah, it's important that you convert your layer beforehand. Otherwise, this effect is going to be burnt into the layer, and then you won't be able to make changes afterwards. Depends on your situation, I guess. Let's have a look at another image here, the eye reflections image that I've created this as a YouTube thumbnail, and back then I didn't actually know about this technique that Christina so kindly brought to my attention. So thanks again, Christina. Very nice tip there. So this is the thumbnail that I put out there on YouTube originally, but now that I'm thinking about it, because this was about creating a ring flash in DAZ Studio, I'm going to see if I can blur out the character and literally put the focus right on the eyes. I think that's a kind of a good idea to do that here. So right now we can see that my layer here is not a smart object. That's just a regular layer, and I can see that because there's no little icon in the bottom right corner of that layer thumbnail here. So what I can do now is right click on this and select, can you see that? Is that still in the picture? No, it's not. There we go. Convert to smart objects. That's the thing we need to click. And as soon as I do that, then I can see that at the bottom here, oops, that's also not where, it's kind of my shortcut keys, I really need to sort those out. Now you can see that little tiny logo in the bottom right corner of the thumbnail, and that means it is now a smart object. And that's perfect, because now I can go to town with my blur filter. And just like before, we get this this line. I'm going to go and put that right onto her eyes. I may even slant that up so that literally her eyes are both in focus. And I don't want this to be mega blurred, so I'm going to extend the bottom line further out so that this maybe up to here, things are being out of focused, if you forgive that terminology. Perhaps bring that down a little bit. Yeah, and just make sure that all this is absolutely dead center in focus. I think I'm also going to pull that line down a bit so that we have the whole face being in focus, and when with her lips things start to get a little bit blurry, but you know, not too much. So I think this would be a little bit overkill here. I think this would be a bit much, so I'm going to tone that effect down maybe to 10. The pixel size of the blur, that very much depends on your actual image size. So if you have a large image, then your pixels will be very small, whereas when you have a small image, then your pixels will be fairly large. So therefore, like a 1 or 2 pixel blur will already create a bigger effect than like a 20 or 100 pixel blur in a really large image. So play around with that. I think this is kind of what I want. I'm going to use high quality this time. Click OK, and Photoshop thinks about it for a moment, and there we go. So it's very subtle, but it does draw the attention of the viewer to a certain part, and that's kind of what depth of field is used in photography and in cinematography as well. Maybe I'm just going to adjust those levels a little bit here, just to crisp that image up a little bit. It's all about subtlety in these images, isn't it? It's all about subtlety in Photoshop. Let's have a look at the pool scene here. So this is the completely unedited image that came out of the render. So it could also do, speaking of levels, it could also do with a bit of contrast enhancement there from what I can see on this monitor. So this is just a background layer right now. Let's have a look at that. Right now I can't really do anything with it, so Photoshop would like you to double click on that, and then this window comes up that says name the new layer. You just click OK, and then this is now saying layer 0, and now we can turn that into a smart object as well. Oh, so it's another good thing. I'm kind of glad this has happened here. If you accidentally click on the front here and right click on that, you won't see the option to turn this into a smart object. So what I can advise you is to click on the right of the text, so not on the image, on the right of this, and then you'll see the convert to smart object right here. You can, by the way, you can also get to the same thing if you head over, with the layer selected, you can also go to the layers menu. So layer convert to smart object is usually smart objects, convert to smart object is usually hiding in here as well. So with that layer selected, let's head over to that blur gallery as well. And I think another tilt shift blur is in order here. Blur gallery, tilt shift. And just like I did before, I want the character to be in focus. Maybe make that a little bit wider here, the bit that is in focus, and then turn that over just to kind of match the pool here. And then, you know, use it to your heart's desire, really. This is much more than I did it in the thumbnail. Let's also use high quality and see what that looks like in the final image. not bad. It's kind of overdone, but it's a quick and easy way to do that. If I added that in the render and kind of figure out where my camera's focal plane needs to be and all that, it just takes a lot of time. So I find that very helpful. Now finally, let's look at the picture of me and how we can turn that into something that looks less cluttered here and less burned out. So this is something where I may be able to use that other thing as well, the what's it called, the bouquet and the light bouquet. So again, I'm going to turn that into a smart object, maybe from here, layer, smart objects, convert to smart object. Doesn't matter, result is the same. Under filter, blur gallery, I'm using the iris blur now this time. And the options are a little bit different. So first of all, we're getting this circle instead of two lines. And this is not exactly depth of field, but it's also a good technique to kind of draw the attention of the viewer to a certain point in the image. So in my case, hopefully my face, if that's something that interesting, one of those things. So the circle itself can be made bigger or smaller. Currently it's an ellipse, I believe it comes up as a circle, so you can just go and make that into a real circle, or just turn the shape into something that you really need. So in my case it's kind of an oval that goes out like that. Perhaps I want my little 3D kind of drawing dummy in focus as well, something along those lines. There's one other option I wanted to show you, which is this little square. If you left click and drag that out, then that turns this whole thing into more of a kind of a rectangle or a square. So that's one thing that you can do here. The inner circles, this is again the same thing. From the inner circle to the outer circle, that's the gradient, and anything outside the outer circle is fully blurred, and everything between this and those inner rings, that's going to be, that's where the blur gradient happens. So if I wanted to make my blur radius a bit bigger in total and then make the fall off a little bit wider, then that's how I can do that. There, that's maybe something we can use on the light bouquet. Let's see if we can put that to good use. It looks looks even sicker than it already does. So color bouquet, since we don't have that much bouquet, it does not really something that works for me. So I'm going to leave that out. The exact blur value, 15 is maybe a little bit much for my liking. Perhaps 10. That'll do the trick. And a few level enhancements there. That's also what we can use. We can stack these effects up. I haven't quite worked out how to do that yet, but if we go back to the pool scene here, I can show you that here, because we've got this all blurred out. Now if I go double click back into my blur gallery, then I can tick another box here, like on the blur gallery at the top here. I could just tick another one, but then look what happens in the whole field. Nothing appears to happen. I'm still on the tilt shift thing. That's because the tilt shift thing is still open. So if I close that and open the iris blur instead, that's when I get my controls for the iris blur. So both effects will be applied at the end of the day, but while you're fiddling with it, you can only have a look at one focal point at a time. I believe that's kind of how it works. I've not read the documentation, by the way. This is just something I figured out, and I thought I'm going to share that with you. So we can have two different types of value, and I really don't know what this looks together. Let's have a look what the combined thing is. Yeah, look, this is both combined now. So I've got the out of focus kind of depth of field effect at the bottom and at the top, but I've also got it around the character now. So this is one thing that, may come in handy. And that was it, really. I hope this was helpful. If you like this video, then of course please share it with friends, family and total strangers. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you found these little tips and tricks helpful, then go ahead and please support me on Patreon. I'd be chuffed to have you on board. You get funky goodies in return, like 3D products, and you get even free web hosting, copies of my book and all the rest of it. It's very, very exciting, and it would be a growing family. It'd be great if you could make it. That's fantastic. Join me also if you enjoy building scenes in Dash Studio. Join me every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a live stream on how to build scenes in Dash Studio and do all kinds of funky tips and tricks all around that phenomenal 3D application. My dear friends, thank you so much for watching. I hope you got a lot out of it. Take care. I will see you next time.